The millionaire's mansion echoed with cries, two babies, night after night. No nanny could calm them, until a quiet black woman walked in. What she did next shocked everyone, and changed their lives forever. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories every night. The same sound echoed through the mansion. WHH. Twin babies, only 8 months old, crying their lungs out. It didn't matter that their crib cost more than some people's cars. It didn't matter that the nursery had a custom-built sound system playing Mozart and rainfall sounds on a loop. And it definitely didn't matter that Blake Montgomery, their billionaire father, had hired 5 different professional nannies from around the world, each with flawless resumes. Nothing worked. The crying would begin shortly after dusk and last until dawn. The entire household was in a constant state of exhaustion, but no one more than Blake himself. Since the tragic death of his wife, Natalie, during childbirth, the once proud CEO of Montgomery Enterprises had become a ghost of the man he used to be. He rarely shaved. He barely spoke. And when he did, it was with a weariness that no amount of wealth could cure. Emma and Evan, his only children, were the spitting image of their mother. Bright eyes, soft curls, and the same infectious laugh when they weren't crying. But every night, their joy vanished, replaced by the same aching sobs. As if they were grieving something they didn't understand, they would clutch the air, twist in their blankets, and scream for hours. Doctors said they were healthy. Sleep experts blamed colic. Psychologists called it emotional trauma, but nothing helped. Nanny after nanny came and went, each one breaking under the pressure. They tried lavender oils, lullabies in different languages, motion bassinets, sleep training methods. Some nannies cried along with the twins. Others quit without warning. Then, one morning, after yet another sleepless night, Blake sat alone in the massive dining hall, his untouched breakfast going cold in front of him. The walls of the mansion, usually symbols of power and success, now felt like they were closing in. That was the moment he made a decision. That he picked up the phone, called his late wife's godmother, an older woman from Georgia named Mavis who had once helped raise Natalie, and asked, "Do you know anyone at all who could help?" That's how she came into their lives. Her name was Miss Althea James, a 52-year-old black woman from Atlanta, with no Ivy League degree, no fancy certifications, and no knowledge of Mozart. What she did have was something the others lacked: heart, experience, and an unshakable calm. She arrived at the Montgomery estate wearing a simple blue dress and a worn leather bag that smelled faintly of cocoa butter. The staff eyed her with curiosity and, to some, judgment. She didn't look like a typical celebrity nanny. She didn't speak in polished psychology jargon. She didn't ask to see the nursery. Instead, she asked to meet the twins. Blake was skeptical. He didn't want another failure. But something about her, maybe the quiet confidence in her eyes, convinced him to give her one night. Just one. That night, the crying started right on time. WH. Miss Althea didn't flinch. She walked into the nursery, turned off the Mozart, dimmed the lights, and scooped up both babies into her arms, one on each side. She didn't say anything at first. She just held them. Then, softly, she began to hum. It wasn't a song anyone in the mansion recognized. It wasn't classical. It wasn't from any sleep playlist. It was old, Southern. A melody passed down through generations of women who had rocked their babies to sleep through storms and sorrow. The kind of song that carried not just notes, but soul. Within minutes, the crying stopped, not just paused. Stopped. For the first time in 8 months, Emma and Evan both closed their eyes and drifted into sleep, their tiny fingers curled into Miss Althea's blouse. The entire house stood still. The night felt holy. Blake watched from the doorway, his heart thudding in disbelief. His babies, finally at peace, and the woman holding them, still humming, as if she'd known them all their lives. From that night on, everything changed. Miss Althea didn't just put the twins to sleep. She taught the house how to breathe again. She cooked warm meals, sang while folding clothes, and told stories from her childhood that made the staff laugh until their sides hurt. She brought sunlight into a house that had been covered in shadows, and Blake, he started smiling again. For the first time since Natalie's passing, there was laughter echoing through the halls, not cries, because sometimes What a child needs isn't the finest crib or a room full of gadgets. Sometimes, what they really need is someone who simply knows how to hold them. Her name was Miss Rose Hill. A warm, no-nonsense black woman in her late 50s, with cocoa-colored skin, wise eyes, and a voice that wrapped around you like a soft blanket. The kind of woman whose presence made you feel like things were going to be okay, even if the whole world was on fire. She didn't come from an exclusive nanny agency, no glowing reviews on parenting blogs, no child development degrees from Ivy League universities, no sparkling resume filled with wealthy family names. She was, in fact, recommended by someone most people in Blake Montgomery's circle would overlook completely, a janitor who worked nights at Montgomery's corporate office. She raised my 3 girls like queens, the janitor had said, gripping Blake's hand after a late board meeting. Try her. You won't regret it. At first, Blake scoffed at the idea. A billionaire, trusting the care of his children to a stranger from someone outside his world? It sounded ridiculous. But after 5 failed nannies, 2 pediatric specialists, and countless nights of wailing twins and 0 sleep, ridiculous started to sound a lot like worth a shot. So he called her. When Miss Rose arrived at the estate the next afternoon, there was no grand entrance. She stepped out of a taxi in a simple, faded blue uniform and sensible shoes. Her only luggage was a weathered brown leather bag and a thermos of something that smelled like cinnamon and honey. She didn't look around in awe at the towering white pillars or sprawling marble floors. She didn't seem impressed by the staff lined up to greet her. She simply walked in like she had been there 100 times before. Then she saw the twins. Emma and Evan were red-faced, eyes swollen from crying, their tiny fists waving in the air as if trying to grasp something they couldn't name. Miss Rose knelt beside their playpen, looked them both in the eyes, and whispered gently, "Oh, babies. I see you. You've been waiting on me, huh?" The butler rolled his eyes. The housekeeper sighed and muttered under her breath, "Here we go again." Another nanny doomed to fail, they all thought. But that night, something shocking happened. At exactly 7:47 p.m., the time the twins usually launched into their first screaming match, Miss Rose quietly entered the nursery. She didn't fiddle with the sound machine. She didn't spray lavender oil or consult a chart. She didn't rush. Instead, she turned off the overhead light, turned on a small lamp in the corner, and gently lifted Emma and Evan from their cribs, one baby in each arm. Then, standing by the window with the moonlight pouring in behind her, she started to hum. It wasn't Mozart. It wasn't a children's lullaby from a YouTube playlist. It was something older, deeper. A tune passed down through generations. A spiritual lullaby that rose and fell like a prayer whispered by ancestors. Her voice was low and steady, filled with warmth and a quiet strength that seemed to pour directly into the baby's little hearts. And then, like magic, the twins stopped crying. Not just paused, stopped. Emma rested her head on Miss Rose's shoulder. Evan let out a soft sigh, his tiny body melting into her chest. Within minutes, both babies were asleep. Downstairs, the staff stood frozen, listening. For the first time in months, there was silence. Blake rushed upstairs, heart pounding. He reached the doorway and stopped. There, silhouetted in the glow of the night light, stood Miss Rose, rocking gently with 2 sleeping babies in her arms, still humming, her eyes closed like she was praying. Blake didn't say a word. He couldn't. His throat was tight. For a man who had built empires, survived Wall Street crashes, and stood in front of millions of investors, this moment brought him to his knees. The next morning, the twins woke up smiling, no dark circles under their eyes. No screaming. Just giggles and coos and tiny hands reaching for Miss Rose the second she walked in. And that's how the house began to change. The staff, once skeptical, started lingering near the nursery just to hear her sing. The mansion, once echoing with grief, slowly filled with light again. Miss Rose didn't just care for the babies. She saw them. She saw their pain, their loneliness, their unspoken grief for a mother they never got to know. And somehow, through the warmth of her arms and the power of her presence, she gave them something no one else could. Peace. Blake Montgomery, for the first time in nearly a year, slept through the night. And as he looked at the woman holding his children with such fierce tenderness, he realized something. He hadn't just hired a nanny, he had invited in a miracle for The first time in months, silenced, and oh shrill cries. No kicking against the crib bars. No desperate wails piercing through the baby monitor. Just a deep, soothing quiet that wrapped itself around the Montgomery mansion like a long-lost friend. Blake had been halfway through a late-night report in his study when he noticed it, the absence of sound. He froze mid-sentence, pen hanging in the air. Then he leaned in toward the screen showing the nursery camera feed. There she was, Miss Rosehill, cradling both babies in her arms with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She didn't sing. She didn't pace. She didn't fumble with buttons on a sleep machine or consult a digital app. She just sat, cross-legged on the soft, moonlit rug, rocking Emma and Evan slowly, one resting against each shoulder, skin to skin. Heart to heart, Emma's tiny hand clung gently to Miss Rose's silver necklace, the little pendant shaped like a sunburst. Evan's face was snuggled deep into her chest, his breath steady and light. Both babies were smiling in their sleep. Blake blinked, unable to trust what he was seeing. Then, like a man pulled by gravity, he rose from his chair and made his way upstairs. He pushed the nursery door open with the caution of someone walking into a dream he was afraid to disturb. And there she was, real. The room was filled with a soft, golden glow from the nightlight. The mobile above the cribs hung still for the first time ever. The stuffed animals scattered on the floor looked like they'd been tucked in two, as if the whole nursery had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. Miss Rose looked up at him and smiled, but didn't stop humming. Her voice wasn't loud. It was barely above a whisper, a gentle, rising and falling melody with no words. Just sound and soul. Blake's throat tightened. He hadn't cried in years. Not when his father died. Not even when Natalie, the love of his life, slipped away during childbirth. Back then, he'd stayed strong for the sake of appearances, told himself tears were for when things were better. But now, standing in the doorway, watching this quiet miracle unfold before his eyes, he couldn't stop the tears from falling. He stepped inside slowly. What did you do?" he whispered. Miss Rose glanced down at the sleeping twins, then back up at him with calm, knowing eyes. "I listened, sir," she said. "Sometimes, babies don't want toys. Or fancy beds. They don't care about classical music or white noise or how much money you spend trying to fix what's hurting them." She gently adjusted Evan's blanket and continued. "They just want to be held, like they're not alone in this world." Blake swallowed hard. "They've been crying every night since Natalie, since the day they were born." "I know," Miss Rose nodded. "They've been missing something. Someone. Not a thing you can buy. Just a feeling." She pressed her hand lightly against Emma's back. Warmth. Rhythm. Connection. Blake knelt beside her, lowering himself onto the rug like a man surrendering a burden he didn't even know he was carrying. "I've tried everything," he admitted. Nannies, sleep specialists, gadgets, formulas. Nothing helped. They were just unreachable. "They weren't unreachable," Miss Rose said softly. "They were grieving. You all were." Blake looked up, startled. Grieving, the word felt heavier than gold, but somehow it fit perfectly in his chest. "We don't think babies remember," she continued. "But they feel. They feel the silence where a mother's voice should be. They feel the cold when arms don't come fast enough. They feel the ache in the air. And sometimes, the only thing that can fill that ache is a heartbeat." She shifted, slightly, resting her back against the wall, never once letting go of the babies. "I ain't magic. I just show up with open arms and a listening heart." For the first time, Blake understood that this wasn't about credentials or childcare techniques, that it was about presence, about offering something real, grounded, human. And that night, for the first time in 8 long months, he stayed right there, on the rug, listening to Miss Rose hum, watching his children sleep in peace, letting the weight of his grief melt into the floorboards. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about work. He just sat in the quiet, breathing, in the moment, relearning what it meant to simply be. And in that stillness, something shifted. In the house, in the babies, in Blake himself, because healing doesn't always come with a prescription or a price tag. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in cocoa-colored skin, humming an old tune, and holding your babies like the whole world depends on it. Miss Rose didn't stop with bedtime. Peaceful nights were just the beginning. Where once the Montgomery mansion echoed with cries and stress, Now it pulsed with a new rhythm, one that Miss Rose brought with her like a sacred melody. She turned routine into ritual. Story time happened under the magnolia tree in the back garden, the breeze gently flipping pages as Emma pointed to pictures and Evan babbled his own versions of the tale. Bath time became a festival of bubbles, giggles bouncing off the marble tiles while rubber duckies floated in warm, lavender-scented water. Meals weren't sterile bottles and microwave formula anymore. Miss Rose brought color and soul into the kitchen, mashed sweet potatoes with cinnamon, hand-blended pea puree. Tiny spoonfuls of banana she'd warm just so, whispering, "Food's gotta taste like love, sugar." The mansion came alive. Staff who had once tiptoed through the halls now lingered outside the nursery to catch a glimpse of the twins laughing. Even the chef asked Miss Rose for her cornbread recipe. The house, once cold and quiet, filled with warmth and sounds that had been missing for far too long. Baby laughter, lullabies, even Blake's footsteps returning home before dark. But the real transformation? It happened in Blake Point one spring afternoon. He returned from work earlier than usual. A board meeting had ended ahead of schedule, and something, he couldn't quite name it, pulled him home. No urgent emails. No crises. Just a pulled out he stepped. Inside quietly, loosening his tie, expecting the usual silence in the front hall. Instead, he heard music, soft jazz, and laughter. Drawn by the sound, he followed it through the hallway and paused at the doorway to the playroom. There they were, Miss Rose sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, her hair wrapped in a bright scarf, sleeves rolled up. Evan was trying to stack colorful blocks, his tiny fingers fumbling but determined. Emma was clapping and squealing every time a new block added to the tower. Miss Rose clapped with her, beaming like this little moment meant the whole world. Blake stood frozen. His children, were laughing, giggling in harmony. No tears, no screaming, no fear in their eyes that he didn't know whether to step in or stay hidden and let the moment live. Miss Rose looked up and caught him. "You can join, you know," she said, patting the spot beside her. He opened his mouth, closed it. For a moment, he wanted to say he had emails to check, calls to return, documents waiting. But the truth was deeper than that he was afraid. Afraid that if he sat down, if he tried, he might fail. Afraid that he didn't know how to be what his children needed. Afraid that, even now, he was still broken. But Miss Rose didn't pressure him. She just smiled, as if she already knew that this right here, was the real work. That night, Blake lingered. A little longer during bedtime. He watched as Miss Rose sang her humming lullaby and kissed the twins goodnight. And when she turned to leave, he stayed. The next night, he read a bedtime story. Fumbled a few lines, made the babies giggle with his silly voices. The night after that, he offered to help prepare their food. Miss Rose handed him a spoon and showed him how to test the temperature on the inside of his wrist. Brick by brick, she helped him rebuild more than the baby's routine. She rebuilt their family. He began waking up earlier, making breakfast before the babies cried. He learned how to change diapers in the dark. He started canceling late meetings, turning down events that once seemed essential. He discovered the joy in being present, not perfect, and slowly, the title that once felt foreign to him began to settle in. Dada. Emma said it first, one morning while he was holding her in the kitchen. Dada. She chirped, clapping her sticky hands. Blake dropped the spoon in his hand, eyes wide with shock. Did she? She sure did, Miss Rose said, smiling. As she wiped the counter, Evan said it a week later, and each time, Blake felt something inside him stitch back together. Not the businessman, not the CEO, the father, the title he never studied for, the role he never expected to do alone, but the one that, thanks to Miss Rose, now meant more than any company, any mansion, any fortune, because in the end, it wasn't just the twins who had needed saving. It was him. Months passed. The once sleepless mansion was now a home full of rhythm and joy. Emma and Evan no longer cried themselves to sleep. They no longer woke up screaming or tossed in their cribs with tear-stained cheeks. Now, they squealed with joy every morning the second Miss Rose stepped into their room. Miss Woes. Emma chirped. Evan, always one step behind, would stretch his arms up and babble. Woes, woes. They didn't need alarm clocks anymore, just the sound of her humming through the hallway. Breakfast was an event filled with mashed bananas, Baby giggles, and Blake trying and failing to master Miss Rose's pancake recipe. The mansion had softened. Where once it echoed with grief and anxiety, now it pulsed with life. Bouncy footsteps, sleepy lullabies, and laughter that spilled from the nursery and into the hearts of everyone who worked there. Even Blake had changed. He wasn't just trying to be a father anymore. He was living it. He could now rock Evan to sleep with one arm and carry Emma's stuffed bunny in the other without missing a beat. He'd memorized bedtime stories, knew which song made them smile fastest, and had learned, through trial and error, that sometimes the best parenting moments were the messy, unscripted ones. That he no longer left the house before sunrise. He made space in his day for morning kisses and sticky-fingered hugs. He called himself Dada with pride, and through it all, Miss Rose was there, steady, loving, gentle. But one morning, everything changed. Blake sat across from her at breakfast, sipping coffee while Emma attempted to feed Evan bits of her pancake. He looked up, took a breath, and said it quietly, "Stay." Miss Rose tilted her head. "Sir, please stay forever," Blake said. His voice cracked just slightly. "I'll triple your salary. Name anything you want. The twins need you." Miss Rose smiled, softly, warmly, the way only someone who truly understands the weight behind a plea like that could. "I love these babies, sir," she said gently. "With my whole heart." Blake's eyes brimmed with hope, but she continued, "My job isn't to stay forever. My job was to love them back to life." Blake swallowed hard, emotion rising in his throat. She wasn't finished. "And to remind you, sir, how to love, too." Those words hit deeper than anything he'd heard in years, because somewhere in the quiet hours between bottle warmings and story times, between diaper changes and afternoon naps, she had done just that. She hadn't just saved his children, that she'd saved him from the loneliness, from the guilt, from the version of himself that had buried emotion under business meetings and grief. I don't know how to do this without you," he admitted, his voice trembling. Miss Rose stood and walked over to the twins, scooping them into her arms one last time. She held them tightly, her eyes glistening now, too. "Sweet babies," she whispered. "You're not broken. You're just beginning." She kissed each forehead, one by one. Then she gently placed them back in their chairs and turned toward the door. Before she left, she handed Blake a folded piece of paper and long speeches. No drawn-out goodbye, just a quiet, graceful exit, the same way she had entered their lives, with love. Blake waited until she was gone to open the note that it read. "The richest man is the one who knows how to hold his children. Don't let go." He stared at the words for a long time, his hand pressed against his heart. The note stayed with him, tucked into his wallet, folded and refolded until the edges frayed. A reminder of the woman who'd walked into his life when he thought he had lost everything, and showed him he still had everything that mattered. They say money can't buy happiness, but sometimes it can bring you someone who teaches you how to find it. Miss Rosehill didn't come with a glowing resume. She didn't need one. That she came with something better: love, wisdom, and the courage to do the unthinkable. She listened, and in that sacred quiet, in her stillness, her arms, her unwavering calm, the twins finally healed. And so did the man who loved them most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty in everyday moments. Yellow Heart Movie Camera news stories every week, because sometimes one story can change everything. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep listening. Sparkles.